Hey there, Workforce. Chris here with Work to Game, and it is time for Warhammer. I'm trying to do these on Wednesdays, but the schedule has been crazy. This week I'm actually out of town skiing right now. This has just been pre-recorded, so I don't miss a week for you guys. So this week we were talking about magnetization, and the reason we would get into magnetization is when you want to talk about having flexibility within kits, especially when you talk about kits that can be used for building multiple models or multiple very different uses for models. So the big one for me right now is that I am putting together my Forge Fiend Mauler Fiend. I bought a couple of them, but they can actually be a Forge Fiend or a Mauler Fiend. And for those of you not familiar with Chaos, a Mauler Fiend is a big, nasty, kind of melee dog guy, runs really fast up the table, gets in people's face, puts out a ton of blows, and a Forge Fiend sits in the back and has these big either Reaper autocannons or ectoplasma cannons that just kind of blast downrange. And so even before you talk about the two different kind of Forge Fiends or the fact that there's a couple of war gear options within Mauler Fiends, it is one kit and it is $70. And if you want to run two or three of them, you'd have to buy two or three kits. Well, I traded in some magic cards for a guy that had three, and so I'm putting these three boxes together, but I want it to be three Mauler Fiends or three Forge Fiends or any combination of, and I want to know that I can bring Mauler Fiends with the big lasher tendrils or not, or I can bring the big cannons or the auto guns and I just want to have options. And so putting together the base model, here it is. It's actually very, very large. I have a little orc guy here to give you a sense of scale. So it's massive. And actually, this is all of the part of the model that stays standard. I'm going to be doing some converting on the tail for the other two because I think otherwise they start to look a lot alike. And then some posing. And so when he is a when he's a Mauler Fiend, he's right here, and when he's a Forge Fiend, he's here. Now the other thing is that when he's a Forge Fiend, there is an option to pay extra to have an extra gun on his face, and so that's done with magnets. And so what it is I have tiny little magnets right in there, and I have a magnet right there, kind of hard to see, and then I do the same in the shoulder sockets and the back sockets. And the reason for that is when he is a Forge Fiend, he actually sits on two back legs and sits upright, and the cannons come out of this big shoulder slot. But when he's a Mauler Fiend, he actually swaps the shoulder gun for a big melee arm, right? Super nasty. And so I need to be able to swap that. Now magnets makes that key, and so actually this stuff, it just pops in here really nice, just like that. Couldn't be simpler. Awesome, right? Well, the hard part about doing that is when you have these options, right? It's very easy on something that's just using shoulder-mounted guns. So I would start with something like that because the key is you pick the right size magnet, and I would pick the biggest one you can fit in there is going to get you a nice firm grip. But actually when you get over a certain weight, or when something is being held out at an angle, kind of like holding like a gallon of milk way out here, it gets very heavy. That's just leverage. And so what I would actually do is these have multiple magnets in them, and so I would put maybe one magnet on top of the other, something like that, so that your magnetization has like a directionality that keeps it from rotating. Otherwise those guns will have a tendency to sag. And then the other issue is you want to think about things like this, where you're doing leg swaps on part of the model, that I'm going to have an issue. When I go to base him, right, the fact that his back legs or his front legs are interchangeable means I never have any legs to glue down. So he's going to have a tendency to fall. So what I'm going to have to do is I've actually drilled a hole right here, and I'm actually going to be putting a thin little metal post in there, and I'm going to run that down. And I'm going to do thin metal instead of the plexi because I think it's less noticeable on such a big model. And actually when I spray it, that will become black, and I will just leave that black. And in the shadow of the model, you'll never see it, especially from the angle at which we look at our models. And that will allow him to sit literally just like this, and then the legs will just kind of hang down as needed. So no big deal. So that's really where magnetization is at. The other thing about magnets is the size hole you drill. Sometimes magnet sets come with the drill presses, sometimes they don't. You do want to get like a little hand press. They look 1,000 different ways, and you want to have one of those. And I would worry about depth before I would worry about width. I don't like friction fitting them, so I don't like it when it's too tight and I have to push them in there because the magnets are trying to pull on each other. That's what holds it on. So eventually that thing can slip out of that friction fit, and it's very hard to get it to stay in there. So I want glue to do the work. And so I actually go a little bit wide, and then I go a hair deeper than the magnet. So if you can imagine a giant magnet for a second, and our magnet is this thick, I would make the hole thick enough that the magnet could sit right there, just below. And that way you can get a little bit of glue around all sides, and then it kind of sits in there, and the magnets never quite touch. They get really, really close together because I find that gets you a nice snug fit deep down in these shoulder sockets. But that's just my preference, and you're going to have to learn yours based on how rough you are on your models, or what your models are made of. You know, even just the weight between fine cast and plastic is a little different, but when you start to talk about pewter and things like that, magnets become a real nightmare. And so practice makes perfect. The other thing I would do is I would make sure that all of your magnets are polarized the same way. And the reason for that is just consistency. So if I have a Space Marine guy that has magnets, and I have a Forge Fiend that has magnets, they are magnetized to the same polarization. And what that means is, however my very first guy that ever got magnetized got done, I now check that every time. And so that means that my right arm could technically go on my left socket and would be hanging backwards. And the reason for that is sometimes you'll have things that are interchangeable, and so it's just easier to always be consistent. And so I have a big stack of magnets, and I always make sure they can kind of stick to a guy's shoulder, and then I will stick that into the next one. And that way all of my left and right arms are totally interchangeable. Everything could go everywhere on every guy. It doesn't matter if it fits. Just be consistent with your magnetization, and do so by checking. You want to get this right. You want to absolutely be sure that you get the magnetization. This is the most important of magnetization, is that you get the polarization right, because if you do a good job setting it down in that socket, it is very hard to get back out. And occasionally I make a mistake. So Forge Fiends and Mauler Fiends have a ton of different parts, and on this one I actually didn't get enough magnets, and one of them slipped and got turned around and got off. And I had to kind of carve this whole thing off and then build it back up with green stuff and glue, and that's just not as good as getting it clean into plastic like I did the other 3 left arms, the other 3 right arms. I did fine. That was the one piece I messed up, and thankfully it's not anywhere you'll ever see it, but it is just kind of a bummer to mess up a perfectly pristine model before you ever get it fully assembled. So with that, guys, I hope you guys are having a fantastic week. I hope this helps. I hope it gives you, just that final push to get you to try out magnets if you haven't done so. If not, I hope if you've already done them before, I hope there's kind of a trick in here that maybe you picked up, but maybe you could share something down in the comments below if you have another trick to working with magnets. Thank you guys so much. See you next week. This is Chris with Work to Game, and I will see you next time.
Hey, it's me. Thanks so much for watching this video. You should click over here to see more videos just like it, or you should click down here to check out our recent vlog. But you can also click somewhere down here below to hit the subscribe button, as well as check out our other info. Again, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.